Okay then, everybody, let's make a start on the webinar, and others can join in as they manage to do so. So welcome to this webinar. It's called Collaborate, Integrate and Aggregate, a thought leadership session and discussion. So the event's been quite a long time in the planning. It was originally going to be planned for early April as a face-to-face event, but now obviously online. So a big thank you to our organiser Emily and the speakers for being so accommodating, as we've changed dates and formats so many times. So it's a thought leadership session to think about some of the issues around best practice procurement and the delivery of off-site modern methods of construction solutions. And they obviously will need to adopt principles of partnership and collaboration, which is also something that I have personally been promoting all my working life, and is, I feel, the way in which to deliver successful quality products and outcomes in the marketplace. So the agenda today: a quick introduction from me. And then we're going to have a session on collaboration and outcome-led procurement from Martin Jones from Constructing Excellence Southwest. And then we're going to have a session from Tim Oakley, a former architect but now working for LHC, on integration and the off-site project integrator framework, a new framework we've just launched. And then we're going to have a session from Tony Woods, our senior technical manager, on the aggregation of demand and collaboration. Tony also sits on the Construction Leadership Council panel on demand aggregation. And then finally a question and answer session for you to answer, or we will answer questions you put up. So in terms of Q&A, if you do want to ask a question, there's the Q&A button at the bottom, and you just put in your question, and you can either send it anonymously or put your name in, whichever you like. And then we'll answer, as I say, the questions at the end. So just a quick intro to the Southwest Procurement Alliance, or SWPA. That's our motto at the top: through improved procurement to deliver better homes and buildings that enhance local communities. So we're the regional brand of the LHC, National Procurement Organisation, and we launched last year in October. We were going to have a big first birthday party this October, but we've decided to defer it and have a second birthday one. The LHC itself has been around since 1966 and was established by 6 local authorities. To date, well, 1920 last year, across the UK, we delivered £350 million worth of projects, and the number of projects we actually delivered was 720. 279 clients. Interesting that 279, 720. So a number of our clients do deliver a lot of projects through us. One of the things we are is a not-for-profit organisation, and we're very proud of our community benefit activities. We're very transparent in the Southwest. We do gives out small grants to clients who have live projects with us for £1,000. They nominate projects that they would like us to support. So on this slide we have some examples, or some pictures of the ones. St Paul's Adventure Playground, last summer we supported a summer play worker. In the centre we've got a playground for autistic children. Top right we have Rusty Road Recovery, and we help them supply and refurbish a workshop to provide craft-based skills. Top left we've got Trowbridge Easy Reading, a literacy project. So those are just some of the projects that we support, and as I say, we're very transparent. You can see where the money goes from. Our surplus is all regenerated into community benefits. So just sort of to move on to the subject of today. On the 1st of June, the Construction Leadership Council published their roadmap to recovery. 3 phases. It's a really good read. I do recommend. It's not too long either. And they've talked about 3 phases: restart, construction industry, first 3 months; reset, 3 to 12 months. And what's most interesting and relevant to today is the reinvent. So transformation, sustain economic growth through the adoption of digital and manufacturing technologies. And that's the bit that we feel that we are working to promote, both as ourselves, as South West Procurement Alliance, and also part of Constructing Excellence Southwest. Our agenda is very much around transformation of the whole construction economy. Just more detail on the transformation, you know, as I say, and the outcomes and benefits has the potential to transform construction productivity, with savings estimated to be worth 7 to 15 billion per annum to deliver high quality buildings. But we need to get it started. We're at the early stages now. And so that's what the next three speakers are going to talk about, the early stages and how we can work to achieve those savings and better quality buildings. So thank you very much. That's all from me, and that's us. And I will now stop sharing and pass you over to Martin Jones. There might be a few seconds whilst he gets his technology working, but I'm sure we'll all be there in a second.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Can you see my slides? I guess you can. Well, good morning. I'm really delighted to be with you here this morning to talk about collaboration and outcome-led procurement. But first of all, just a few words about who I'm representing today. I'm from Constructing Excellence Southwest, which is charged with driving the change agenda in construction here in our region, although Constructing Excellence does operate nationally as well through a regional partnership. What we're all about really is trying to improve industry performance in order to produce a better built environment. One of the key, I guess the unique selling point of Constructing Excellence is that we are cross-sector. We work across all sectors of the built environment. We are cross supply chains, so from clients right through to component and material manufacturers. We're a member-led organization, so everything we do is driven by and for the benefit of our membership. What do we do? Well, we do quite a lot of things. We run thought leadership groups, tackling the particular issues that we're facing at the moment and into the future. We run local Constructing Excellence clubs, and we have 9 of those within our region. We run a program of webinars similar to this event today, and we have, of course, up until the advent of the coronavirus, held face-to-face events. We have a regional awards to recognize those people who are achieving excellence within the region. And we have published a number of guides, some of which are shown at the bottom of my slide. And we produce case studies and advice notes that hopefully people will find helpful. Okay, on to the subject of my bit of the webinar, which is about collaboration and outcome-led procurement. Let's start with collaboration, because we get there are many definitions of collaboration. These are just a few that you often hear people describe it as. I like the bottom one, which is what Constructing Excellence keeps banging on about. So we're very much about people within the development process collaborating to achieve the very best outcomes and for all the parties involved. So you hear people say it's a good way of working together. It's a process designed to encourage people to work together. It's all about an integrated team structure, a contract which encourages trust and open dialogue between team members, and so on and so forth. But if you look, I guess one of the reasons why we have so many definitions of or interpretations of collaboration is that collaboration is really a spectrum of working methods. So you can see here from 1 to 5, we've got confrontation where there is no collaboration, so we're operating in a hostile or argumentative situation. And then we move on into a transaction where we buy or sell something. So maybe we're buying printer paper for the photocopier or whatever it might be. So simple buying and selling transactions. And then we move into number 3, which is a lot more interesting, which is about the act of arranging, making things run smoothly, avoiding gaps and overlaps in team members' work and so on, which is now then taking us into the realm of project management. And then on into cooperation, the action and process of working together to the same end, and with some mutual benefits. And then ultimately on into number 5, which is collaboration, where we really start getting very creative in the relationship. So what I'd like to do at this stage is to ask you as to how would you describe the working methods in most of your projects. Now, I understand that different projects will have different degrees of collaboration, but if you think about your sort of fairly average typical project, how would you describe the working methods that you adopt? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? If you could please vote now, that would be great. Thank you.
Just waiting for the results to come in, Martin.
Thank you.
Okay, looks like we've got most of the results in now. Most people are going for coordination, and
Right.
cooperation's coming second. Tied next is transaction and collaboration, and confrontation has no votes, thankfully.
Well, nobody's admitting to it anyway. But I think, you know, very often we set out with the best intentions of coordination, and then issues occur within the project, and it can then regress back into confrontation, can't it? So even in maybe the best run projects. So that's very, very interesting. So we have people in the most people in the coordination bracket. That's excellent. So clearly that shows that we're well along the spectrum of collaboration, but clearly there's more progress to be made if we see collaboration as the ultimate destination. Now, okay, so we want to move towards collaboration. Collaboration is challenging, particularly in construction, because we are a project-based industry. So we don't have the flow of work and trusting and open relationships, operating system, business models and incentives that are yet suitably developed for full collaboration. But there are significant benefits from collaboration. If we quickly look at if we look at the past 20 years where we've seen people collaborating, the prizes for the clients are better functionality and better project outcomes, lower cost of total ownership, less inefficiency and waste, and less disputes. And there are benefits for the industry as well, in that they experience less wastage, higher margins, greater employee satisfaction and well-being, and have then the money to invest in more research and development and more training and development of their staff. So the prizes are there, and there are also opportunities opening up to achieve those prizes. So we see the wider use of frameworks, for example, within our region, and more use of the two-stage procurement process, which does foster more collaboration. So let's take a current example of collaboration. Context for collaboration, particularly in the context of this webinar. We have a client framework client, maybe an individual, large individual client or part of the framework, a modular building systems company, architect, structural engineer, and maybe a substructure contractor, all agreeing to establish their reputation and offer different value propositions in off-site manufacture, for example, for housing. And we see here, through frameworks, clients are able, either if they're large clients, through their own development programs, or through aggregating their demand across a number of clients, we can then start to get the flow of work to the supply chain, which is necessary for greater collaboration. So we see the flow of work to the supply chain, and that then supports and encourages investment in learning and research and development within the supply chain, and leading, of course, to innovation, including MMC. And if we can put those, if we can cluster those suppliers, as shown here in the green colors, around the client and the client's needs, then that's when we start developing real change, real improvements in project outcomes for all the parties involved. So here we see the suppliers clustered around the client needs. And so what we're talking about here really is mutual strategic advantage. So by going to collaboration, all parties within the relationship benefit. And they start to build up mutual competitive advantage. The other thing which can allow this collaboration to, the other thing that collaboration can allow to proceed is to move from output-based procurement to outcome-based procurement. And that's really not possible until we move into greater degrees of collaboration. Now, if we look at this diagram here, you can see that this is, I'm sure you've come across this diagram before, and we use it a lot in construction excellence, but it shows that if you take costs, for example, design costs, construction costs are relatively small in relation to the other costs involved in operating and maintaining the facility, and then also the business costs that are incurred by the client in actually using that facility. And what we see is that clients tend to fixate on this very early part of the process, tending to fixate on the design and the construction costs. And that obviously is particularly prevalent in periods of austerity, as we've seen recently. But really, we should be looking rather more at operating and maintenance costs, which are substantially over the life expectancy of the facility, much larger than the construction and design costs, but also the business costs. And it seems to me that the other thing that we're missing really is that we're not focusing enough on the other outcomes from the project. So if we look over here on the right-hand side, this big blue area, all the wonderful outcomes that can proceed from the facility. For example, setting it in an affordable housing context, we've got improving the resident experience, improving the health and well-being of residents, and so on. So we can see focusing on the real value that can be derived from the particular facility. So the focus here of the client obviously then changes from a detailed specification, so the bricks and mortar, if you like to use a traditional term down here, to actually what are the real value outcomes from the project. And so the focus of the client really moves from fixating here on the bricks and the mortar to actually what it is, what are the really big outcomes that you want from the project. And the other thing here is you can see that we've got a feedback lines here at the bottom. showing that as we develop a greater understanding of what it is, what we want in terms of the outcomes, that then feeds back into the supply chain. And we get this kind of virtuous circle of where the supply chain is more and more informed of what it is required from the project. Now, this is a long-term project because for clients to release their fixation, their focus on this early stage, they have to have confidence in their supply chain. And that's where the longer term relationships and the trust, the competence trust, that's important to move to outcome-led procurement. So in procuring to build, how do we procure to build competence and trust and competence, trust and collaboration? And we obviously need to change the way in which we procure. And I'm going to show you now a box, a tool which we use within Constructing Excellence. We call it the 4-box tool, which helps us to position where we are in terms of, for clients, procurers, either clients or main contractors or whatever, to position where they are in relation to their procurement approach. If you look at this diagram, you can see, as the name suggests, we've got 4 boxes. There are 2 axes to the box. There's the left-hand side, which is the focus of the buyer-supplier relationship, moving from reactive to proactive. And then over on the bottom axis, we see the first tier, second tier, and whole supply chain. Now, what's evident is that, and this is borne out by a recent survey within the Constructing Excellence Southwest region, most clients procure in box number 1. So they buy reactively. The buyer reactively selects products and services from existing supply chain offerings made by suppliers operating at the first tier. So that's probably main contractors. If you move to partnering, and partnering isn't so popular these days, but it was very popular, you move to this box 2, which is supply development. So you work on buyer works on a continuous and proactive basis with, say, the main contractor to improve product and service functionality and so on. Now, and then over on 3, we have supply chain sourcing, which is where the client's very well informed. We've got an intelligent client and can buy services and products directly from the different tiers of the supply chain. But I guess the one that we're really interested in the context of this webinar, given the fact that we're talking about NMC, is really move into box 4, which is supply chain management. And now you've got, if you remember our cluster of suppliers and client from the previous slide, they're now all working continuously and proactively to transform the current trade-off between product and service functionality, overall cost, and value of the ownership. So the next poll really is, how do you procure your contractors, or if you are a contractor or a supplier, how are you procured? Are you procured in box 1, 2, 3, or 4? And a poll should now be appearing to allow you to vote. There you go. So do you, again, obviously you will have projects that have spread across a range of procurement options. But if you think again about your kind of average, your average project, your normal project, your typical project, are you procuring, or are you being procured through supplier selection, supply development, supply chain sourcing, or supply chain management? So in other words, 1, 2, 3, or 4. If you could vote now, please, that would be great.
It looks like we've got everyone there.
Brilliant, well done, thank you very much.
We've got supply selection coming out on top, followed by supplier development, and supply chain sourcing and supply chain management. Haven't got any results on this one.
Right. Okay. That's really, really interesting. So again, we've got, if we want to procure to increase collaboration and move to outcome-led procurement, and I think we've obviously got some work in progress, some progress to make. That's really very interesting. Thank you very much indeed. That's really great. I'm now going to move on, I think, which is to my last slide of my presentation, and this is a quotation from one of our publications, one of CSW's publications. It's a really good read if you haven't read it, if you haven't already read it. But it is about outcome-led procurement and a common sense approach to construction procurement. And on the last page of that guide, we give a quotation from Albert Einstein, who said he defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And picking up on what Mary said in her introduction, and the need for change, given the additional challenges and uncertainties, but also maybe what I should have added in there as well as the opportunities we face, maybe now is the time to collaborate, integrate, and aggregate. So that's the end of my presentation. So I will stop sharing my slides and hand over to our next speaker.
Hello, Tim Oakley. I hope you can see me there, and I hope you can see my slide. Well, I'm going to be talking about how to integrate, and I remember from my pure maths in 1969 A level, how you integrate the x2 over dx is exactly as stated there. I remember it very, very well. Not. So how does LHC integrate? How does SWPA offer integration? As I said, I'm a registered architect, and after qualifying at Bristol University in the 1970s and 80s, I was involved in a huge variety of commercial and residential projects, ranging from banks and building societies through factories and warehouses, GP surgeries and hospital wards. But I also undertook the design and contract supervision of private and public bungalows, houses, flats, residential estates and barn conversions, none sadly using offsite or NMC. But in 1996, I gave up my private practice and I came to work for LHC on the procurement side of the business, developing frameworks for use in the public sector. What I want to talk about today is the work we've been doing to promote the use of modern methods of construction, MMC, particularly in the public sector. So I'll first touch on what prompted us to develop our approach to offsite, or MMC as we now know it, and how we developed one of the first frameworks in the UK to deliver offsite manufactured homes. I'll then talk about the challenge areas and what we considered were the obstacles to its widespread adoption to provide the much needed homes this country needs. I'll then go on to discuss LHC's innovative proposal to help clients adopt offsite as the preferred route where appropriate, and how to decide whether offsite is appropriate. And finally, I'll go through the details of the framework, the tender procedure we adopted, the appointed companies, and what to do next. In February-March 2018, I attended stages of the House of Lords Science and Technology Select Committee receiving evidence on the poor uptake of offsite in the UK. Now, some may regard the Lords as a collection of unelected old stuffy old duffers who wouldn't know modern if it slapped them in the face. But the meetings were extremely interesting and they were probing. Maybe it's because I'm now also a signed up old duffer, but I was impressed with the final report of the Offsite Manufacture for Construction Building for Change. And what the committee discovered, and what we at LHC already knew, was that there are clear and tangible benefits from offsite manufacture for construction, which make a compelling case for its widespread use, including cost and time savings, improved safety and quality, and high levels of sustainability. However, take-up of offsite manufacture has been somewhat limited. Why? Because they saw that the construction is fragmented and lacking in trust. Where the successful delivery of offsite projects requires early involvement of designers, contractors and suppliers, Trust is an essential requirement, not just desirable, but essential. Increasing trust requires a significant change in business models, both in the construction industry and in the commissioning and developing sectors. It also requires a far greater level of collaboration. The required different approaches were suggested by the many contributors to the committee, but an influential suggestion was made by the Institute of Civil Engineers Infrastructure Client Group, who proposed their Project 13, in which the current transactional structure, you know what it goes like, I've got some funds, you go and build me something that my architect has designed, and I'll pay you if you give me the right price, if you deliver the right building without falling out with everyone. Oh, and by the way, I'll only pay you when you construct something on site every month or so, as long as my QS agrees with what you've spent, which is highly unlikely. So you replace that with the enterprise structure. I and my investors will employ somebody who knows what he's doing to liaise with my key suppliers and advisors, together with other capable suppliers and advisors, to collectively and collaboratively deliver me the solution I've been looking for within our agreed parameters of value for money. Whilst LHC sees this proposal as a long-term strategic solution, we see a quicker, immediate solution that leverages the skills of capability of the existing LHC NH2 framework that has been developed over the past 7 years or more through research and development, the procurement and use of our first NH1 off-site homes framework, and subsequent feedback. Our solution, as you can see there, is to place the off-site project integrator in formal control of the contractors, manufacturers, suppliers, and consultants, and in full control of all the processes and procedures from initiation and development through to handover and use. The long-term strategic integrators would act as poolers of demand, component-based supply by manufacturers, and collaboration and standardization. They would integrate across the industry and market, and they squeeze the best out of all the players to make off-site work. LHC's off-site project integrator role is all about smart procurement of single projects, leveraging the skills and capabilities of the existing LHC frameworks, but also encouraging cross-client aggregation of demand and encouraging cross-manufacturer standardization of supply. In previous presentations, I set out the processes often undertaken by commissioning bodies that are virtually guaranteed to fail in the delivery of off-site homes. Briefly, these steps are: 1, planning, but not doing so effectively and not involving off-site manufacturers and designers early enough. You know, their experience and specialized knowledge are invaluable at an early stage to avoid costly changes later on. Stage 2, engaging consultants with whom you've worked before, but on traditional construction and have no experience of off-site. Experienced consultants are more likely to provide proposals that will not need redesigning later down the journey and will have a greater understanding of specification and costs. You approve the plans that have been produced by the inexperienced consultants, and you allow them to go forward for planning permission. Well, permission given for such designs is more likely to require substantial revisions later down the journey, when the off-site manufacturer gets involved. So you go to tender before really receiving planning consent, and you commission your consultant to obtain lump sum, single stage design and build tenders from a mismatched mix of tenderers, but don't engage with them. Single stage tendering and tender documentation that places all risks with a successful tenderer will not be favourably received and will lead to expensive risk pricing. Failing to engage with the tenderers will lead to misinterpretation and failure. So you receive the tenders, but due to the poor tender process, only half of the 6 candidates who expressed interest will submit, and all will be above the budget. Commissioning your off-site inexperienced QS to value engineer the project, to cost cut the project, without consulting the tenderers is also doomed to fail. And if you do go for the cheapest cost cut value engineered solution, the costs will all go back up again when the off-site manufacturer has to redesign the scheme to suit off-site methods. So you replan the original proposal to suit off-site methods, but you add back all the items that were engineered out by the QS because their emission doesn't comply with your organisation's minimum requirements. This will inevitably increase costs and delay the project. You construct, if the proposal hasn't been abandoned, but during the initial fabrication stage, change the agreed designs and introduce layout and specification changes, all things that increase costs. You complete the project, if it is completed, but don't engage the project reviews and lessons learned to improve the next project. Don't monitor the project performance in use to continuously improve. Why would you? Because you're going to vow never to propose off-site again. Alternatively, You can employ the services of an off-site project integrator from the moment you commence your new build strategy. LHC's framework for off-site project integrators is for the managed integration of all aspects of the delivery of off-site solutions for housing, bungalows, flats, apartments, sheltered accommodation, care homes and student, NHS and blue light accommodation. It may also be used to manage the delivery of non-residential projects. The framework is covered by 4 OJU contract notices for England, South West England, Wales and Scotland, and it provides local authorities, housing associations and other social landlords with fully compliant, easy access to the integration of off-site projects, including volumetric, panelised, high-rise and turnkey building systems. The OPI framework provides the client with a single point of contact to manage the effective implementation of off-site housing schemes, and the framework will draw off existing LHC NH2 and H1 consultants frameworks, and maybe even the H1 construction framework for certain mixed-use schemes. It could also access non-LHC frameworks and sources if required, for instance, the client's own framework. This could then lead to the development of new LHC frameworks, groundworks, etc. At call-off stage, the OPIs are required to engage in the first instance with LHC's NH2 offsite housing construction and MB1 modular buildings appointed companies and appointed companies to other relevant frameworks to establish the capability of the LHC's existing supply chain in respect of delivery of a specific project. Other companies can be sourced, for instance, at the request of a client who has an existing successful relationship, but they must comply with a minimum set of capability requirements related to the LHC's framework requirements. The OPI framework service relates to the RIBA plan of work, which coincidentally was upgraded in February 2020 after I went out for the OPI, and it now refers to manufacturing as well as construction, which now recognises the importance of MMC. However, the service also includes work carried out prior to the RIBA stage 0, and I included pre-RIBA stages. Initiation development, though the February 2020 plan did add some detail regarding the initiation, and land assembly services if required. The work carried out through the RIBA stages involves strategic definition, preparation and briefing, concept design management, spatial coordination, which was previously called develop design, technical design management, manufacturing and construction management, which, as I say, has now got manufacturing into that stage title, handover management, and in-use reviews. The framework will service all types of dwellings, houses in multiple occupation, low, medium and high-rise residential blocks, residential homes and student, NHS and blue light residential accommodation, as well as non-residential off-site projects. And it's with a wide range of types of ownership, including tenanted, shared ownership, help to buy, owner-occupied development with or without public financial support, any future housing models that the LHC client may develop. The framework requirements include project management service delivery, including development of pre-contract service agreement, forms of contract, processes for elemental life cycle cost planning, development of BIM and common data environment, cost and risk management, and performance monitoring. Also included is advice, guidance, collaboration, and framework integration at no additional cost, and also optional in-house or outsourced design services. Not all appointed companies offer this, but details can be found in the documents or on inquiry. So how did we conduct our tender? This was by way of an OJU compliant innovative partnership procedure in which candidates were selected through a PQQ stage to receive first stage tender documents setting out the minimum requirements, which were evaluated and, where appropriate, suggested amendments, variations or additional services were included in a second stage tender. We had 67 expressions of interest, 19 PQQs and 15 tenders. And after a rigorous evaluation, 8 awards were made in the SWPA region, being Airy Miller, Arcadis, Black, Mace, Ramboll, Taylor Lewis, Turner Townsend and WSP. And the tender evaluation was carried out first through capability through the PQQ in terms of business and professional standing, exclusion criteria, mandatory and discretionary, financial standing, quality management, and capability for geographical lots. Candidates were required to demonstrate in their submissions their capability by reference to an off-site project or projects carried out in the regional lot that they applied for. 80% of the evaluation was on quality and was evaluated in the first stage by asking tenderers how they would deliver call-off projects in terms of clarity of organisational setup, business continuity and disaster recovery plans, which is so important in the current climate, project management, service delivery cost, risk and performance management. And as I said before, they were also asked to propose variations, amendments and additional services, because I didn't want to set out exactly what LHC saw as the end result, but what our minimum requirements were, so that the market could then propose what it was capable of collectively providing. So at the second stage, those innovative services were evaluated. There was more detail on land assembly, the development of the PCSA and forms of contract, processes for elemental life cycle cost planning, development of BIM and common data environment, and the advice, guidance, collaboration, and framework integration, and optional design services. So pricing. 20% of the value for money pricing was evaluated through submitted hourly and daily rates and a selection of project rates for residential low-rise and non-residential projects, and uplifts for medium and high-rise and education projects. So the appointed companies in the SWPA region were Erie Miller in the various rankings that you see there: Erie Miller, Arcadis, Black, Mace, Ramboll, Taylor Lewis, Turner and Townsend, and WSP. The call-off project. During the call-off project, the fees that are invoiced to clients must be no higher than the project percentage rates in the tender submissions for the various stages of work, and no higher than the daily and hourly rates in the tender submissions. Invoices also are required to include the LHC levy of 5% of all services provided. But as LHC and SWPA are not-for-profit organisations, as Mary alluded to earlier on, any surplus income that we receive through the levies is rebated to members and framework users and through community benefit projects. This slide sets out the normal process to kick off an OPI call-off services project. From identifying a potential project and contacting the SWPA client support managers to discuss OPI 1's suitability to registering the project, through the SBA will then issue an expression of interest document so that the appointed companies can respond to in terms of whether they are interested in responding to that particular project. And those responses are reported back to the client, who will issue the mini competition or direct award documentation. So having evaluated the responses and awarded the project, the client will then advise SWPA, who will then be available throughout the project for technical support. It looks a complicated diagram, but it's a fairly good workflow as to how we help you in getting call-off projects on the go. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening. And I look forward to working with you in the provision of MMC homes. I'll now hand over to Tony Woods. I'll stop that share there. And Tony Woods will be on the line shortly.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Tony Woods, and I'm going to be talking to you today about aggregation of demand from LHC's perspective. I'll run a little bit through the history of aggregation demand and then finish off with some of the issues and problems that we've come across over the last few years. As my colleague Tim said, we've had an offsite framework set up since 2014, which I was the person behind that who brought into LHC to do that. Prior to working for LHC, I used to work for BRE and then for two offsite contractors delivering social housing and private developments. I also was a Code for Sustainable Homes assessor, and more recently have become a passive house designer. So I'll start our little journey through history, talking a little bit about LHC itself. What's quite interesting from my point of view is this is the minutes from the very first meeting when LHC was set up in 1966. And if you look at the points on the agenda to be discussed, you would say most of those are things that we're looking at today. Coordination of industrialised building programme, I guess that's what we call MMC now. Establishing common social and technical standards, bulk buying arrangements and developing new systems where necessary. So our heritage has been in off-site manufacturing and delivering housing, and I guess we're coming back to that. So what I thought I'd do is take you through some of the examples of collaboration and aggregation of demand that have been carried out over in more recent times. So in more recent history, in 2001, we had the Amphion project, which was 30 registered providers coming together to look at providing social housing. They had some issues with that, not agreeing standard house types, particularly with planners. They ended up with one contractor, and then people couldn't provide the demand required. This then morphed into the Advantage Southwest, who had their own framework with specific house types, and I believe they still have those house types today. However, with the crash in 2006, that took out some of the manufacturers through the process. Then a bit more recently, we had the £60,000 house competition with John Prescott. And part of that process was the English partnership sites that were being used at the time around about 2006 were designated to have at least 25% of the housing built on those sites built with MMC. And the idea behind that was that the £60,000 house competition would feed into that. One of the issues has been Oxley Wood in Milton Keynes. There was design issues with that, which ended up with a claim of £5 million being done. And more recently, in the last few weeks, the next phase of planning permission has actually come out to be built traditionally, and they've had trouble with that because the Oxley Wood was meant to be a modern methods of construction project to be built. In 2006, you had the Smart Life project, which was EU funded up in Cambridgeshire. They set up a college for training people up with MMC, and also as part of that, they were looking at having a study of sites, so 100 units being built across 3 sites, and measuring the requirements. And what you can see on the site, right-hand side of the slide, is a Smart Life lessons learned, which was an in-depth study to show how those compared. So they were using timber frame, light gauge steel frame, and traditional construction, and seeing how they went up. One of the issues they had was with the procurement process, that they had a demand for 5,000 units over a 4-year period, but they had a large proportion of members, about 15 partners. So when you look at that, they had no clear procurement route, which would equal to about 300 procurements over 4 years if you did that traditionally. So you can set up these projects, but you've got to look at how the procurement process is run to give opportunities to be able to bring that aggregation of demand together. And unfortunately, that was one of the problems they had. 2014, the Modular Alliance based up in Manchester with 15 organisations that came together. We went up to see them in 2014. Unfortunately, at the time with our framework, we only had a single modular supplier, which they felt wasn't sufficient for their needs. However, they went through the procurement process in 2016 and ended up with one organisation to work with them, who then withdrew from the market a few years later because they didn't like the cost. However, again, they had no standard design and no standard specification to use during that process. Internal aggregation demand, one of the key issues has been internally within organisation is, are you bringing your projects together themselves? And one of the issues we found with one local authority, finding the land, the number of sites that actually dropped out from the original numbers that they were proposing to do together. Councillors moved the goalpost. They changed the land availability during the process as well. Planners wanted different density requirements, which then affect the overall requirements. And for this particular authority, the planners decided that the largest site that the organisation had put out to procurement, they only wanted 50% of the properties to be affordable housing. They wanted the other half of the site to be sold off for private development. So again, this then impacted on the aggregation of demand. And when the organisation went out to do their own procurement, they had limited responses, and they ended up with a traditional contractor. Their approach was to try and get an MMC manufacturer, but through the procurement process, people dropped out and they ended up with the wrong result for what they actually wanted to achieve. Another example, an old garage site. The client had originally got planning permission for 3 bungalows. They decided to go out to tender and appoint an MMC manufacturer, and it took them 3 years to get the project through planning because the planners didn't like what they were doing. The buildings were finally built, but they ended up with 4 flats. And I think Tim alluded to this, is when the client reviews it, they see that it's very expensive and very slow, both for the client and the supplier. We need to take this learning into projects. Again, some of these pilot projects, and I think this was touched on with construction excellence, that we need to take this learning forward and learn from a project and keep that as part of the process. If you do a one-off project, then a lot of the time with construction projects, that learning then disappears out, and you may have had the pain, but you get no gain for that. So other activities that are going on at the moment, as Mary touched on, I'm involved with the Construction Leadership Council and the Aggregation of Demand Group, and we're working with those. And one of the things we're trying to do, these are the list of various organisations which are actually out there aspiring to do aggregation of demand at the moment. And what we're trying to do is get those organisations to come together and talk around the table to try and get best practice, best ways to procure. And take those through. So build our site in the north, interesting for us. First 3, you've got build our site in the north, Sheffield City region, and Building Better are all based in the north of the country. They're all trying to do the same thing, and Manchester as well, but they're all based in the same region. And they're all having those struggles. They're all coming out with their own solution for procurement, which is probably going to take them a couple of years to decide what they're going to do. And then it'll probably take them up a couple of years before their procurement route starts to get traction. And one of the things we're finding at the moment is organisations want to get on and actually start delivering housing. There's a need for housing now. So how do we to do that? And then Homes England have got a project which is looking at investigating the best benefits of offsite, which will probably take 4 to 5 years and 1,500 units. And I guess one of the things I was trying to show with some of the history of the past is a lot of these things we've already done and already found some of the issues, and we're reinventing the wheel again, which I guess if what's history shown us, a camel is a horse designed by committee. And I guess what we want to make sure is with some of these initiatives going forward, they're not going to be camels again, but we will end up with horses. So one of the things with the LHC framework, it's been running since 2014, and we've had 131 projects worth £670 million worth of work, which equates to over 8,000 houses that have been built. So I guess from our point of view, our framework is more of a horse than a camel. And one of the things I think we've learned from this is we need people to start to be building the houses, get involved in the process, using things like project integration and construction excellent routes to get a clear understanding. Once you've got an understanding of the process of off-site manufacturing, you can then start to aggregate and bring your requirements together. Now, what's been touched on a couple of times, and one of the key problems with aggregation of demand is how we currently tender. We touched on this. Single stage traditional tender, and the comment at the start about how we approach this is a lot of this, I would argue, is we may not think of it, but it is confrontational, because we put all the risk onto the contractor, and then when the contractor runs out of money, we have an argument with them. So we come up with the design, we'll get the planning in place, and then we say to the contractor, you need to build this, without them having any input. And that's where the value engineering comes into the process. And we tend to have a JCT, design and build contract, with our own set of amendments, which again, those amendments are aligned to put more of the risk on the contract. We give limited information, short period of returns, and I think, as Tim touched on, we award on the lowest price. So is this really the best way to go forward? So two-stage tendering is one of the things we're trying to get people to think about, which is more working with the supply chain and certainly with the OPI to actually engage at the earliest possible stage. So you can actually do things like actual value engineering when you're working on the design, so the client and the supply chain and the consultants can all sit down and work together and work out how design changes will actually affect the overall budget of the project. We can work out the actual cost, so we can look at subcontractors' packages and work out what it actually means rather than guessing what they are. And we can have a real risk register in relation to the project, so the client and the contractor are quite clear on what the risks are associated with that particular project. And we can set a contingency in place which is fair and reasonable for the project itself. And at the end of that, we've got a final price for the project which should be accurate and reflects the construction costs. Now, I guess the health warning for this is it may be higher than the actual target price originally. And coming back to, I think, the previous slide with Einstein, I did see some papers from a local authority who said they would go through a two-stage tender, and if they got to the end of stage one and found that the contractor didn't hit the target price, they'd go to somebody else to get them to rework it, which I guess is the sign of insanity, is going out and expecting a different result but asking the same question. And then in stage two, they can actually commission the project itself. And part of this is the early engagement with the supply chain to be able to work together to do that. So, working together, I guess procurement route, we need to have a clear procurement route at the start of the process. People always use procurement as a problem or an excuse, but it's not. If you start with it at the beginning of the process and clear on what you're going to do, it can help you achieve what you need. And this is where working with things like the OPI, having a clear procurement route at the start of the process to know that you can actually engage with the supply chain at the earliest possible stage. And preferably, if you're looking at off-site manufacturing and things like that, don't get the planning first. Otherwise, you're going to have to rework it and redesign, as Tim touched on. Pilot projects. If you're going to do pilot projects, sometimes we found infill garage sites, these aren't cost effective to build on traditionally, but people have an expectation that they can build on them with MMC and it will wave a magic wand and deliver them easily. And I think it's one of the things that's been touched on by the other speakers as well, is use the lessons learned for a bigger program to aggregate demand. Don't waste the learning. And I think we do waste that. We have a pilot project, say it doesn't work, and then we decide we're not going to do it. So we've got to look at that as a learning process. And I think one of the things we're finding now is that learning process is more about the clients learning about how to deliver projects better rather than the manufacturers. The manufacturers know how to deliver it. It's whether they can get engaged with the clients at an early enough stage to achieve this. So partnerships issues, and we touched on the camel analogy earlier. If you've got a large number of partners, can they agree standard house types? You would hope that would be straightforward, but as history has shown us, sometimes that's not an easy thing to do. Employers' requirements. Have you reviewed those? Would you be happy with the common specification? And then the contract itself. We say we use the JCT, which is meant to be a standard contract, but how many pages of amendments have you got? I've been doing this job now for nearly 7 years, and I've only had one client who said to me when I've had this discussion with them, they said, nope, we use a JCT contract. We have no amendments to the process. Finally, then, with the aggregation demand is, can you actually commit the number of project sites to one contractor or supplier for your program of work? Because this is what we're talking about. The initial steps are you as an organisation getting an aggregation of demand for your projects going forward. Added on to that, you've got supplier risk. There's a certain nervousness with off-site manufacturers. Well, if I work with one manufacturer, what happens if something happens to them? So can you look at working with a number of manufacturers to deliver both the volume, but also the range of products you need? There's various different types. Modular housing or modules may not be suitable for some sites. So you've got to consider how you do that. Moving on to then, the WPA have a cluster together at the moment. They're managing demand. They're working with Magna Housing Association and Roll Along to deliver the first phase, first 50 odd units. They've got agreed specifications, employer requirements, all those good things we were talking about in the previous slide. They've started to bring that together. A Magna Housing Association have brought the aggregation and their supply together, so they know where they want to go and how they want to achieve this. And they're now looking at phase 2 with us to see, right, how can we expand that pipeline going forward based on the lessons we've learned. How do we achieve this? Well, one of the things we're using is a framework alliance contract, which allows different organisations to be able to aggregate their demand together, but it also allows you on the other side to bring suppliers together to aggregate suppliers to deliver the demand that people need. So I will now finish off at that point and hand back to Mary so she can open it up for questions.
Thank you speakers for all your very interesting presentations. We have 3 questions in our question box. The bottom 2 seem to be poll answers, but the top one I think is interesting, and I'm not sure whether people can see it, so I'll read it out. In our team, we are keen on the outcomes as a priority to lead the design, but in local government, we have financial constraints. So how do we align the two? You want me to read that out again to you, panelists, or can you see that? No, they can't. Let me read it out. In our team, we're keen on the outcomes as a priority to lead the design, but in local government, we have financial constraints. So how do we align the two? So who would like to have a go at answering that? How do we align the financial constraints with the desire to provide outcome-led procurements?
Shall I jump in there, Mary?
Go on then, Tony.
I'll have a go. I guess it's similar to what Magna, their approach to this is looking at the whole life costing, maintenance issues, and ongoing to see how you can bring some of those values and costs into the procurement. So rather than just basing on the initial price, and I think this is what Martin brought up with his graph of construction costs and things like that, is, well, what are those outcome costs which are associated with maintenance and well-being and things that you can actually spread those across the whole project. So it's readjusting your budget so that you're taking some of that value perhaps back into the construction to make it better, but it's going to reduce your ongoing costs going forward. I don't know if Martin's got anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think it's a question of internal education, I think, really, isn't it? It's about making the case for more outcome-based procurement within the client organisation. So it's persuading people in relation, you know, that the outcomes are worth, add considerable value to the whole process, that balance the cost issues.
I would add in an example of that with one of the other companies that's on our framework, which is Local Homes, which are owned by Accord Housing Group, and they take the approach of delivering very low energy housing as part of their standard build process, and they found that they actually get more rent is paid on time because people have more available income because they're spending less money on energy consumption. And I guess that's an outcome which can be valued, but it's difficult to include that, as Martin said, with the education process within an organisation if you're purely focused on the construction costs. It's how you bring that all together.
I think the decision makers need to realise that it requires patience and time. You can't necessarily demonstrate these things immediately. They take some time to evolve and to develop.
It certainly is, from my point of view. It's around doing the modelling on the whole life costs of a home or a range of homes, rather than just looking at the costs of the upfront costs. It's looking at the whole costs and over the lifetime of that product. I mean, unfortunately, what we don't often do when we're involved in social housing or any sort of housing is look at the long-term energy costs, but there is a significant benefit to the occupants of homes if it is an energy efficient home in the long term. I don't know whether anybody's got anything else to add on that one. No. Well, I hope we've answered your question in part. It's a meaning of life question. Maria says thank you very much. But if you want to discuss further, do drop us a mail. We're happy to sort of provide a fuller answer rather than one on the hoof. Anything else from anybody else? Or I think we might. No, I don't think so. No. Nothing else come in at the moment. So I think what we'll do, without further ado, we won't take up any more of your time from your next webinar or next exciting event, and just say thank you very much for joining in. And yet again, thank you to all the participants for their very interesting presentations. And we are doing a series of webinars jointly with our off-site manufacturers. The next one's on the 9th of July, a joint one with Building with Frames, who are a Cornwall-based off-site manufacturer using timber. So we're going to be doing a joint webinar with Building with Frames to sort of discuss their products and give you an overview, as we can't all go and visit all these factories in lockdown at the moment. So do join us for that. We'll send an invite. Look forward to catching up soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.